Good morning, good people. A few days ago I put up a series of videos reading from my book against the privatisation of the NHS. The academies are another area in which corporate profits have been allowed to trump proper education. As you know, they're effectively privatised schools run by private chains which are responsible for educating our children. Now, they were brought in to help turn around failing state schools, and in actual fact there are any number of problems with them. They were based on an idea by Margaret Thatcher, who tried to set up a system called City Academies in the 1980s to do the same. The only thing is they didn't work, and she and Norman Fowler were winding them up until Tony Blair was elected in 1997, took the idea out of the bin and decided that he was going to expand it. In actual fact, they're no better than state schools, even though they get more funding. And there are also problems with exclusions and selection of pupils. For those with greater ability get in, those from poorer backgrounds stay out. Yeah, it's not a solution, but rather a problem. A little while ago I wrote this pamphlet. It's only a few pages of A4. Academies failing schools for corporate profits, laying out some of these problems. I'll start reading. Introduction. Our school system is under threat. Nicky Morgan, the present education minister, this is when I think Liz Truss was in power, not Liz Truss, Theresa May, wishes to turn all our schools into academies. This is the name given to those schools which have been taken out of the control of the local educational authority and placed under the absolute control of a sponsor. These may be businessmen or religious organisations such as churches. Many are now run by academy chains, private companies specialising in running such schools for profit. While these schools are privately managed, they are nearly totally funded by the state, and the state pays dearly for them. They are supposed to be the answer to the problem of failing schools in inner city areas. Ideas of taking schools away from the control of local educational authorities, the state authorities responsible for local schooling since the 1902 Education Act, first appeared under Conservative Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher in the 1980s. They were a response to scare stories about mismanagement and poor teaching by loony left local councils and trendy progressive teachers. These issues are still with us, but they're in the academy schools now as well. But academies are not a solution to these problems. The original pilot schemes under Thatcher were discontinued, despite considerable hype at the time, because they were dismal failures. The new academy system, launched in 2000 by Tony Blair's New Labour, are no different. Analysis by educationalists and trade unions show they are no better, and in fact may be considerably worse than the failing state schools they replace. But they may be a lucrative source of profit for the sponsoring businessmen, including the inevitable hedge funds that have wrecked so many public services. The schools are being part privatised and our children badly taught by poorly paid teachers working in equally poor conditions for corporate profit. And I go on. Sorry, for some reason the printer didn't print it out properly. Academies, another second-hand Tory policy. Much of New Labour's threadbare ideology was just revamped, discarded Tory ideas. This was clearly shown before Blair took power in the early 1990s, when John Major's government dumped a report compiled by the consultants Arthur Anderson. This was immediately picked up, dusted off, and became official New Labour policy. Similarly, PFI was invented by the Tories, with a little list. By the Tories' man with a little list, Peter Lilly, who was upset because private industry couldn't get its claws into the NHS. This again was taken over by New Labour and became the cornerstone of Blair's and Brown's ideas of funding the public sector. Academies, initially called City Academies, were the same. Basically, they're just a revival of the city technology colleges set up in the mid-1980s by Thatcher's Education Secretary, Kenneth Baker. Baker decided that the best way to solve the problem of failing schools was to take them out of the control of the local education authority and hand them over to a private sponsor. These would contribute £2 million of their own money to financing the new school, and the state would do the rest. Despite lauding the scheme as innovative and successful, Baker found it impossible to recruit the high-profile sponsors in big business he wanted. BP, which is very active supporting community projects, flatly told him they weren't interested as the project was too divisive. Another organisation, which campaigns to use private money for public projects, also turned it down, stating that the money would best be spent coming from the government. It was an area for state funding, not private. The result was that Baker was only able to get interest for second-order entrepreneurs who were very unwilling to put their money into it. From being a minimum, that £2 million funding recommendation became a maximum, and so the scheme was wound up 3 years later in the 1990s. After initially denouncing such schemes, Labour showed its complete hypocrisy by trying out a second version of them. The education action zones, which also collapsed due to lack of interest. Then, in 2000, David Blunkett announced his intention to launch the Academy system, then dubbed City Academies in 2000, in a speech to the Social Market Foundation. Again, private entrepreneurs were expected to contribute £2 million of their money, for which they would gain absolute control of how the new school was to be run. The taxpayer would provide the rest. Again, there were problems finding the appropriate sponsors. Big business again wouldn't touch it, so the government turned instead to the lesser businessmen, like Peter Vardy, a car salesman and evangelical Christian. Other interested parties included the Christian churches, like the Church of England, the Roman Catholic Church, and evangelical educational bodies like the United Learning Trust. There were also a number of universities involved, such as the University of the West of England here in Bristol, and some sports organisations like Bristol City Football Club. Some private fee-paying schools have also turned themselves into academies as a way of competing with other private schools in their areas. Taxpayers foot the bill. While the sponsors are supposed to stump up £2 million, or in certain circumstances more like £1.5 million, in practice this isn't always the case. The legislation states that they can also pay in kind. Several have provided some money and then provided the rest of their contribution with services such as consultation, estimated according to a very generous scale. For Beckett, this consists of the sponsors sending an aging executive to give his advice on the running of the new school. This particular individual may actually be past it, but the company can't sack him. So they fob the new school off with him instead. Sometimes no money changes hands. The Royal Haberdasher Society, one of the London livery companies, decided that it was going to sponsor an academy, but it already owned a school on the existing site and so did nothing more than give the site, generously estimated at several millions, to the new academy. Other companies get their money back in different ways, through tax rebates, deductions and the like. But if the private sponsors are very wary about spending their money, they have absolutely no reservations about spending the taxpayers' hard-earned moolah. An ordinary school costs something like £20 million to build. Academies cost more, often much more. £25 million, sometimes soaring to £37 million or beyond. Several of the businessmen sponsoring these academies have built massive monuments to their own vanity, using the services of Sir Norman Foster. Foster was, like Richard Rogers, one of the celebrity architects in favour with New Labour, whose monstrous carbuncles, copyright Charles Windsor, now our Lord and Master, were considered the acme of cool. One of these was called the Learning Curve, and consisted of a long curving corridor stretching across a quarter of a mile, of which were the individual classrooms. Foster also built the Bexley Business Academy, a school whose sponsors wanted to turn the pupils into little entrepreneurs. So every Friday was devoted exclusively to business studies, and the centrepiece of the entire joint was a mock stock exchange floor. Can you see Gordon Gekko with that? Greed is good. Greed is right. The school also had an innovative attitude to classroom design. They only had 3 walls in order to improve, supervise and prevent bullying. In fact, the reverse happened and the school had to spend more money putting them up. Unsuitable buildings, and some of the buildings designed by the Academy's pet architects are most unsuitable for the children they are supposed to serve. One academy decided it was going to get the local school for special needs children on its site. These were kids with various types of handicap. Their school was certainly not failing, and parents and teachers most definitely did not want their school closed. But closed it was, and shifted to the academy. The old school for handicapped youngsters was all on the same level, which meant that access was easy or easier for those children with mobility problems. The new school was on 2 floors. There was a lift, but it could only be used by pupils with a teacher. The parents told the sponsor and the new academy that they had destroyed their children's independence. They were greeted with complete incomprehension by the academy company. HM School, Belmarsh. In other academies, schools for the Sprogs are more like those in a prison. One of the schools, which preceded an academy on its site, had a problem with bullying. The new academy decided to combat that problem by not having a playground. They also staggered lunch into 2 brunch breaks, which were taken at different times by different classes. These are taken in a windowless cafeteria. The result is a joyless learning environment, and the school has acquired the nickname Belmarsh after the famous Nick. Norman Stanley Higgins, you are a habitual pupil and are hereby sentenced to 5 years. You can see that being, like a parody of porridge, really. Poor staff conditions. Both New Labour and the Tories have regurgitated endless amounts of Thatcherite verbiage about choice when hyping their schemes to take education out of the control of local authorities. In fact, parents and teachers frequently have little choice over how academies are run. The funding agreement gives the power to make decisions regarding school management to the sponsor. These agreements get rid of all but a token representative from the parents and school staff on the school governor's board. The staff governor may not even be a member of the teaching staff. They are free to set their own pay, terms and conditions, and are outside the regulations governing the conduct of teachers. New Labour was early faced with public opposition when they announced that teachers employed in academies would not have to belong to the compulsory professional body that makes sure teachers are actually fit to teach children. But Aaron and his team boasted that it was all part of the freedom academies enjoyed from the regulations binding conventional schools. Somebody pointed out to them that if this regulation was unnecessary, then surely it should also be repealed for ordinary schools. And if it wasn't, then the regulation should be enforced in the academies. At that point, New Labour decided that the regulation did apply and backed down. Several of the academy chains, including run by 3Es, won't recognise trade unions. These are massive staff turnover, including headmasters. Some of these are hired for truly eye-watering sums. One head, who formerly ran the King Solomon Jewish School, was taken on by an academy for £120,000. This chap eventually left as his experience running a faith school did not prepare him for the problem of coping with a mainstream school whose children were taken from a variety of ethnic and faith backgrounds. End of part 1, as they used to say.